Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. And today I'm going to retest Ryzen because so many of you have been asking me to redo it. Because normally when I do my reviews, the way that we do it is we keep reviewing stuff one item at a time, but we don't go back and retest everything right at the beginning because it's normally a fair indicator of the stuff that would have been available at launch. And let's face it, if we were to go back and retest everything every time, we just wouldn't be able to ever get any work done. But a lot of you were quite passionate about the fact that there have been a lot of changes and possible optimizations with Ryzen that you wanted me to kind of delve in and give it a fresh look. So I have done. But something else that you guys had said to me a lot was with my 1500 and 1600X reviews, you did say to me that a lot of you at home were not being able to get up to that 4 gigahertz kind of like halo marker for your overclock. So what I did is I got in contact with some friends in the industry that might just happen to own a really big e-tailer and said, can I borrow some CPUs? So I got some retail CPUs, and before you think about it, no, they're not going to end up getting sold to you afterwards by said retailer. They'll go into their test systems and stuff. But I borrowed a 1500X, a 1600X, and an 1800X. Now these came off the shelf from said retailer, so they're the type of things that you guys could get at home. So there's two kind of areas that we're covering there where yes, we have changed the CPUs, but they are still the same ones, 18, 16, 15, but then we're going with retail ones as well. So to clarify the other things that we've done, we're also on the latest BIOS, but we're using the same test system. So the test system that I've been using right since the very beginning 1800X review is the Asus Prime X370 Pro, and then we are using a 980, but the 980 is featured in pretty much every CPU and CPU and motherboard review for like the last 2 or 3 years. So it does give us a really nice baseline. You know, forget the fact that it's a green team card, it's just the fact that it's the same graphics card continuously. Beyond that, we are on the latest BIOS from the Asus website. Nothing special being given to me whatsoever. It's the BIOS that's available to you guys. And at this present moment in time, that is 0805. And then all of the other programs, drivers, everything else were updated prior to the review. So we were on the latest graphics card drivers. We made sure all the Windows updates had been done, all of the programs like 3D Mark and PC Mark and all that sort of stuff. If there were updates available, we made sure that we got those all installed as well. So there was every possible optimization made to the system that we could have done. There was nothing that we've left out. So, you know, it was basically, it was given a total kind of driver and software makeover to try and make the best of the CPUs. Now, one thing I say, when we do get to like overclocking and stuff, and we will kind of talk to it, first thing that we did notice with the 1500X and the 1600X is it didn't really like going above 3.9 gigahertz, which does correlate with what a lot of you guys have been saying in the YouTube comments and on Facebook. What we had got with the initial ones, the initial samples that I did get from AMD, I did get 4 gigahertz from those ones. So there was a 100 megahertz drop. So when you see the graphs in a minute and some of the retests, because in the graphs the RTs are retests, if there has been a little bit of a drop, that is plain and simple why it was. But before you all start moaning and sort of saying, oh, you've just made it look worse, well, you know, that there was stuff that had come off the shelf. But the most important thing to take from this is that you can actually see the kind of numbers that you can get with kind of a basic kind of CPU overclock that you guys can do at home. And because the 4 gigahertz does seem to be a halo, and that seems to be the silicon lottery kind of winner. It's kind of strange that there is only a 100 megahertz difference, but 3.9 now does seem the sort of overclock that pretty much anyone should be able to get at home if your cooling's okay and you've set everything up correctly. 4 gigahertz seems to be, if you've done fairly well with the silicon lottery. 4.1 is absolute halo sort of stuff, and I've only actually been able to get a screenshot of that on my review 1800X I think it was 1 or 2 times. I've never been able to get it stable though. So that is just something to kind of put out there so that you're aware. We've given you all the details. We know everything that's going on. Cooling on this, I will say, is a H110i GT. So we've got a 280mm AIO in the front. It's more than enough to keep the CPUs cool enough, really, is the best way that I can put it. Yes, sometimes we do ramp the fans up, especially when we're trying to cool the 1500X, but it's not an issue. We don't want to go putting massive water-cooled systems on there and stuff, because it's going to detract away from what most of you guys are going to end up doing anyway. I'd say this is the upper level of normal anyway, because I think most of you are probably going to end up using like air coolers, or maybe even the standard cooler. Now, if you're going to be using air coolers or the standard cooler, you're obviously either going to end up with a lot more noise or more heat, so it's probably going to mean that you're going to need to bring the overclock and your volts down a little bit. If I had have done this review with the standard cooler or air coolers though, they would have looked even worse. So we've gone with a best case scenario, especially once we realised we'd lost 100 megahertz off the 4-core and the 6-core anyway. You may also wonder why I've not done the 1400, 1500, 1600. Well, to be honest with you, it takes 2 days for us to be able to test one CPU anyway. So we spend pretty much a day doing the stock, do the overclock normally late in the evening, and then we spend the next day doing the overclock test. So there's about a week's worth of work gone into just the testing on this review anyway. So there's an awful lot of time and effort gone into it. So to add all the extra CPUs in, it wouldn't have really, well, it would have added so much extra work, it wouldn't have really added, I don't think, anything into the video itself, which is why we've kept to the core, you know, the X's. But one of the things I will say, as far as the 1800X is concerned, if you are thinking about buying it and you don't know whether to get the 1700, the 1700X or the 1800X, from my experience, I would genuinely say just buy the 1700, because I don't think that the 1700X and the 1800X are really worth the extra money above the non-X ones, especially if you are planning on doing a manual overclock and overclocking it. I've not been lucky enough to get the 1500 or the 1600 in, but that would, if that was to follow suit with the 1700, I probably would say just get the slightly lower ones as well. You might end up with a 0.5 of a megahertz, maybe lower overclock as a worst case scenario, but they're pretty much the same sort of chips. The only chip that I've tested so far that had a lower overclock than the rest was the Bogo Basic 1400. So the 1400 was the 4-core and 8-thread product, but it was the lower end one. It had lower clocks out of the box, and I'm pretty sure we got about 3.8 something out of that as a maximum overclock. So they're all things to keep in mind. But the weird thing is, with a Ryzen CPU, if you've got a 4-core, 8-thread product and they're both running the same speeds, they will perform the same. The difference between them is just a name beyond that point. And that's another reason why when I say 1700 over the 1800X, that's because if you had a 1700 and an 1800X and they were both running 3.9 gigahertz, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two, despite the fact that the bloke that had bought the 1700 would have a bigger smile and probably have more beers or like Mountain Dew on his desk, or he'd bought himself a better cooler with the money that he'd saved. So that is the reason why I'd say, you know, if we're going to have all of these arguments about Ryzen being so much cheaper and all that sort of stuff than Intel, you can also have those arguments when you break it down and argue about the differences between the Ryzen CPUs themselves. So if you're just talking about 8 cores and you're talking about price versus performance and bang for buck and all of that sort of stuff, that's why I would favour to go for the 1700 native. So all of those details are out there. We've done a lot of testing, pretty much. You're going to end up, it depends on like your specific CPU, so I'm not going to end up giving you like volts, because CPU to CPU can be different with the amount of volts that they may require. That's called the silicon lottery. It's a pretty standard thing, to the point that like I said, you could have, let's say, 5 1500Xs, and they may all need different volts to be able to achieve the same clock, because the silicon is never, you know, quite the same. Also, the difference between one motherboard to another motherboard, so you and your friend might have different motherboards, and you can take the same chip out and put it in your friend's rig, and your friend's rig may need less volts, it may need more volts. So there are lots and lots of variables, and that's why I tend to try and teach you how to manually overclock and learn your system yourself, rather than just hand out settings, which might not really get you the kind of the best kind of setup for your system. It's a bit like teaching a man how to fish and he'll eat for the rest of his life. Give a man a fish and he'll think he's had a bad night out and gone home with the wrong girl. Anyway, so to bring Cinebench up, Cinebench, we'll smash it in. What you will see is we've just got the Ryzen CPUs in these. Some of them, if you go to the OC3D website, so on the OC3D website, we've got all of the tests on there. We've started doing a specific blender test, which is a custom OC3D blender test that we're doing with 3 million polygons. So we're starting to run some new stuff. With some of the smaller graphs, we have put in some of the most recent Intel stuff, but that's just in there to pad out the rest of the graph, because otherwise we quite literally just had Ryzen retest stuff in there. But mainly what we've done with this review is we've just got the old Ryzen and the new Ryzen results in there. But Ryzen 3 is rapidly approaching. So when the Ryzen 3 review goes live, they will go in with these, in with our CPU results, which will be a mix of all of the AMD stuff and then the Intel results as well. So that's going to make things kind of interesting. But we wanted to make this review, or the data that we're giving you in this one, just very AMD focused, so we can focus on the fact, have we really come any further to where we have been? One of the things I do also want to say is I wanted to talk about memory, because memory is really the main focus point because of all the Agisa updates and stuff like that. When I first reviewed the 1800X on the launch BIOS with this board that I got, I was struggling to get 2666 megahertz, and that was standard across the board. People were struggling to get high memory speeds with the original 1800X. And remember that the 1800X come out as a CPU on its own in the box, do you know what I mean? And that was literally our first kind of, you know, like hands-on with Ryzen. Thankfully, it's changed night and day now. I would say to the point where 3200 megahertz is probably going to be achievable by everyone. The difference between whether it's going to work or not, some memory kits can still be a bit picky, but a lot of the time, if you can't get it running with DOCP or XMP, depending on what the board manufacturer is still calling the kind of like the auto setup, and you do have to go into the BIOS to turn on XMP, unless you're lucky enough to have a button on the board to enable it. If you've bought a rig and you've built it and you've bought 3200 megahertz memory, you're like, woo, amazing. If you've not been in the BIOS and enabled the settings for that, or flicked the switch on the board, then you may not actually be running it at rated. If you open CPU-Z and click memory, you'll have a number underneath. Now, don't panic if it looks really low and it's saying something like 1600. You need to times it by 2, because DDR stands for double data rate. So whatever it says in CPU-Z, double it, and that will be what it's actually running. So if it says 1600, it's running 3200. So that's just so that some of you out there that may be new and kind of looking at this and wondering whether your system's doing quite good, if you've not set your memory up, you may have 2666 memory. If CPU-Z doesn't say 1333, then it's not. I would have thought that if you've not set it up, some of you out there are going to be running something along the lines of like 1013. 13, does that work out? No, because it'll basically be running 2133 normally out of the box. My brain's not working well for me today. I think it's 20,066. So that is something, if you've paid out for that extra memory, try and get it running. So 3200 megahertz, I would say, is a really good stopping point. Some boards and BIOS configs and stuff can still need a bit of manual intervention. The SoC volts in the BIOS is a point of sort of note. You need to give that an eye. Don't go above 1.2 volts for the SoC, but at the same time, don't just smash in 1.2 and leave it there. You always want to make sure your volts are running the lowest possible that they can be. So if it works on 1.2, then you turn it back to 1.9. If it works on 1.9, then you turn it back a little bit more. And we always try and get our volts down as low as possible, because over time, and it's just the way silicon works, things are going to start to degrade. So it's actually good that you can then go back in and turn them up again. I know some of you are going, I'm just going to put it at 1.2 and leave it there, because then when it does degrade, I'm not going to need it. Because it doesn't really work like that. If you just leave it at 1.2, when it does degrade, and it will probably degrade quicker than if you'd had it on the lower volts in the first place, when it does degrade, you've then got to turn it up too much. So because it's just the way that silicon kind of has a weird wearing kind of action, and over time, like I said, sometimes we do need to increase our volts. But if they're already got used to running at 1.2 and they've worn the gates that little bit at 1.2, then you're going to need to go above it. So that's why I always say bring it all kind of down, so it's all nice and tight, but it also is going to drop your temperatures as well. That all goes with CPU volts as well, by the way. But yes, so you need to set up the plumb in the actual speed that you want it to run, 3200, 3000, 2800, whatever. Memory timings, that's a thing. Memory timings, if you have a look on the side of your stick, it will tell you what the memory timing should be. It might be 14, 14, 14, 34, for example. But if you have a look on the side of your memory stick, it will also say what the voltage should be. And that's the other critical thing that you need to make sure that you plumb in. Some boards, amazingly, are still getting a bit funny with putting the actual voltages in and setting the SoCs up properly. So sometimes knowing these things can be really kind of handy. Another really handy thing that you can do if you're a bit worried about that sort of thing is, you've heard me yabber on about it, get YouTube up on your phone and you can hear me talk about it, and then when you get in the BIOS, it may calm you down a little bit when I'm running through telling you what to do. You can watch the video while you're in the BIOS and do it like that. I could do like a manual setup guide, but the problem is when I do a manual setup guide, I have like loads of people saying to me, why didn't you use a Gigabyte board? Why didn't you use an ASRock board? Why didn't you use an MSI board? Why did you use G.Skill memory? So I can never win, so that's a lot of the reason why a lot of the time I just don't bother, because let's face it, if I put a day's worth of work into trying to make a guide for you and then most of you end up telling me I've done it wrong or I have used the wrong stuff, then it's just like, anyway, so moving swiftly on to the results. So actually, no, we don't need to turn on the lights because I've not finished memory yet. So 3200 is a really good stopping point. But as I have said, we started off at 2666. So 3200 now is actually really kind of great. But the point is with the Agisa 1.0.0.6 updates, a lot of the board have 4000 megahertz now available for you to go in and select. I've not found any that have done 3600 on their own yet though. 3466 seems to be a point that, especially with the CPUs that I've had my hands on, have like stopped at. I have tried to do manual SoCs. I have tried to do, you know, full hands-on manual to get to 3600 megahertz. But as yet, it has eluded me completely. And by that, I mean, I'm not using like base clock multipliers or base clock generators to kind of work my way up. That's literally just been going in and using the dividers that you get with most normal boards and then changing voltages and stuff around it. So yeah, 3600 I haven't got yet. If you've got a 3600 megahertz CPU, then you may actually just end up with a really strong IMC, so an internal memory controller. But it's something that has eluded me as such. So 3466 seems to be my kind of like crowning moment at the moment. But this is why I say that 3200 is actually a really nice place to stop, because 3200 means that you're not buying very, very expensive memory and then not getting the most from it. So you're actually saving yourself a bit of money, and it's quite a safe point for knowing that if you have paid out for that, you then you then know you're going to be able to get it running with minimal fuss. Whereas pushing past that point, it definitely means that you're going to need to know your way around the BIOS. It definitely means that you're going to be paying more money for those sticks. And it can end up just being a bit of a faff. I've had boards in the past that have been running 3466, and with a new BIOS change they've dropped back and not been able to even do 3333. So at the moment things are still quite fluid. We are definitely still in the kind of active Ryzen beta phase with, you know, the board manufacturers and stuff, and the fact, because I do genuinely think that when Ryzen first come out, it really, in my opinion, wasn't really ready for the public, because so much has happened since. Especially with BIOS updates and stuff. I personally think that they probably should have held off for a few months and given us a more refined product. But, you know, if you're happy with the fact that things have, yes, we have had increases, and, you know, things have definitely got better. But I just think at the beginning, especially when I know how many boards and stuff were getting sent back, like RMA wise, because stuff just wasn't ready, and it wasn't really the board manufacturer's fault at all. But anyway, so now finally we can get on to results, and it's, to be honest with you, it's not really that exciting. So we will look at Cinebench. You can see it's, the one thing that we've got is the fact that the 1800X is at the top of the graph, because we had the 1800X running at 3466 memory, so that's made a nice boost with this. With the 1500X and the 1600X, they were running at 3200 megahertz memory strong. Sorry, 3333 strong, so we went above the 3200 megahertz. They were all done with manual settings though. The other thing to remember is, as I said to you previously, the original 1500X and 1600X were tested at 4 gigahertz. The RT, the retest, were 3.9 gigahertz because they're new samples. Right, I do apologise, my nan's turned up, so I now need to get this done fairly quick. So the RT stuff is the retested stuff. So with the 1500X and the 1600X, that was done at a slightly lower overclock. But like I've already explained, that's because we were running retail CPUs, not the original CPUs that we got sent right at the beginning. So we got the Cinebench R15 stuff. But to be honest with you, with the first one that we brought up, which was the single CPU, this is the one that you want to pay attention to more than anything else, because the single threaded stuff, as you can see, the difference between the retests and the other ones, there is a nice kind of gap there. The normal ones where we do the OpenGL and the CPU stuff, it kind of follows what we would have expected, but the 1800X favours better, because the 1800X would have been both run at 4 gigahertz, but we had a higher memory clock on the retest, so that means that's the one that's had the biggest boost. X265 benchmark, it's actually kind of funny, because you've literally got pretty much throughout the retests are slightly above on the X265 benchmark, despite the lower clocks. It can kind of change and stuff, but anyway, so we'll move on. Gaming, 1800X absolutely smashed out right at the top. One thing that I will say with gaming performance though is I was expecting a bigger difference with this, mainly because we were running new GPU drivers. So I was hoping for something so 3D and gaming based to have made a bigger difference, and it kind of didn't, because in the grand scheme of things, 100 megahertz overclock on a CPU shouldn't make a big difference onto your actual gaming results. But a new GPU driver should, and one of the things that we've seen with this is it kind of doesn't. Now, is that because NVIDIA has gimped it? I think that would be a kind of strong way to have put it. But I think really what it does kind of show is that maybe the optimizations that have been done, games and driver based, may have been more heavily based towards AMD graphics cards. But this is something that we can keep an eye on, and we can come back maybe possibly to have a relook at if and when Vega eventually rears its head. This is the one that really does show an optimization has been done there, and that's PC Mark 8, because consistently the retests are above. So this is one of the ones that we can say that even though we were running at a lower clock with the 1500X and 1600X, the PC Mark 8 stuff has had the optimizations and the stuff that they've done within their benchmark has made a big difference. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time going through, but consistently, one of the things that we did see is sometimes the older results were better because of that 100 megahertz. But to be honest with you, they weren't as big as I was expecting. Kind of what we've got to the point with really is, even though we're running at slightly lower clock, they're almost on par with the older, higher clock stuff. So that's a really good thing. The other place that we can see that we've had a good boost, and this is one of the reasons why I was trying to draw attention to the fact that the lower ones have kind of caught up with the quicker ones from before, is that with the 1800X, it pretty much, the retests have topped the graphs every time. So it's a shame that I couldn't get the 4 gigahertz out of the retail CPUs. I probably could have if I'd gone and rerun them all again, but like I said, there were so many of you saying that the 4 gigahertz was unachievable for a lot of you. I wanted to make it fairer and get stuff off the shelf to do it that way. And obviously getting stuff off the shelf and then I'm not overclocking as much is obviously added in an extra angle to this review. But it's also, I'm hoping you'll see, what that's also done is, although they were slightly lower, it's really, there hasn't been, there isn't much between them. So you can see that the optimizations and stuff has gone through. But the biggest change has been with memory performance. So whereas before we were really struggling, especially right at the beginning, we were really struggling with memory, and then it was kind of hit and miss and people are going looking for specific dies and stuff. Things are getting better and they are getting easier. Something I would say is voltages seem slightly better across the board as well. So I've obviously used the Asus, the Prime board, because that's what I'm familiar with. That's the board that I've used right from the very beginning. But currently in the office, we do have a Gigabyte board and an MSI board on as well. One of the things I've noticed with the Asus, they finally sorted out all their spazzing voltages going all over the place and all being done with offsets. That seems to have got a lot better. I don't want to go into talking about like the other boards because I've not spent enough time with it, but I can say that some have got better, some have got kind of worse, and the fact that the offsets and stuff are just going crazy all over the place. I've been paying a lot of attention to some of the stuff that you guys have been saying on the comments and stuff, especially recently. So one of the things I cannot stress enough is, if you've got yourself a Ryzen system, please make sure that you keep up to date with your BIOS updates. It's actually really easy to do. All of the boards now, what you can do is just put the BIOS file onto, not the RAR or the WinZip file, but unwrap it and then put it onto a USB stick and do it that way. If you know how to use BIOS flashback, MSI and Asus do it. A low level flash can help at least once if you've not done it from the early ones. But make sure you keep up to it with your BIOS updates. Because it does make a big difference. And if you've got stuff in your BIOS that's driving you nuts, or your voltages aren't staying stable, then, and you've made sure that the reason why they're not staying stable is and you have checked your load line calibration and all that sort of stuff, and you don't just expect it to magically work. But if you've gone manual and there's still stuff that you're not happy with, then your BIOS updates are going to be where they're going to come from. Behind the scenes, I am giving them grief left, right and centre about trying to get the BIOSes fixed. It's one of the reasons why the Asus stuff has actually taken a step, but much bigger step forward, because they actually listen. But I do know that, for argument's sake, Gigabyte at the moment are properly struggling with their BIOS devs, and I think that's it's not an AMD thing. It's literally just a company thing at the moment. They need to start cloning BIOS devs. But anyway, so you got your retests, and this really has just been an infill video, and it's an infill video because we're going to need these results for when I test the 1200 and the 1300X, because Ryzen 3 is here and you're going to see the review next week. Save that one till the end. But thanks for watching. This has been Tiny Tom Logan with another video for you. Oh yeah, that's next as well. Crosshair Extreme. Keep an eye out on Sunday.